In 2008, Barack Obama wanted his campaign media strategist, David Axelrod, to sign on as senior advisor at the White House. Axelrod says he was reluctant because
I've always fashioned my whole life so that I could tell anybody to go, and I said, you can't say that to the President of the United States. He said, no, you really can't, but you can tell me to go. He said, just don't do it in front of anybody else.
So Axelrod joined. If Donald Trump asked him on board now, though, he says he doubts he'd get the same clearance.
I don't know if he'd let me, but I bet you I'd get there pretty quick.
I'm Charlie Meyerson. In 1984, my wife Pam and I moved onto the same Oak Park, Illinois block with the family of David Axelrod, whom I'd known through our work for Chicago's WXRT radio. I was honored when the Wednesday Journal newspaper of Oak Park asked me to sit down with David to kick off a new series of public conversations at Dominican University in neighboring River Forest. Here's how it went, September 6th, 2017.
We're going to break this down into 4 parts, basically. That's the intent. We'll see where it goes. Part 1, David, the Oak Park years.
Yes.
Part 2, the White House years. Part 3, the one based on the questions that I've been receiving from audience members suggesting that I ask you, is the one I think people are most interested in. We're calling Part 3, What Now? Subtext.
That could be the shortest section.
Help us, Obi-Wan Axelrod, please. And Part 4, we'll get to some of the many, many questions that the audience has submitted in advance. So I want to get the pandering out of the way first, David. What do you love about Oak Park? Or Oak Park, a great suburb or the greatest suburb?
Well, Charlie, as we discussed before we came out here, the thing I loved best about Oak Park were the neighbors.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we moved to Oak Park in 1983 on the 173 North Harvey. I just met someone who just bought that house. Where are you? Right there. You got a really good house. You got a great house there. And the thing, we were there for 10 years. I had 2 small children when we came, and we had another child while we were here. Some of you may know that my oldest child, Lauren, had significant health problems and attendant disabilities. And there were some other kids on the block who also had significant challenges.
Yes.
And one of the great things about the 100 block of North Harvey, and I think it reflected the spirit of Oak Park, was everybody was on their porch. Everybody was looking after everybody. The kids played together, and parents kept an eye on everyone. And there was a real sort of sense of community on that block. And we moved not because of any deficiency particularly, but because we needed a certain kind of program that at that time, educational program for my daughter that we didn't think we could find in Oak Park, and we moved to a suburb I won't name, but you can easily research this. And the difference between Oak Park and that suburb was, I always say, in Oak Park everyone had front porches, and in that suburb everybody had back decks. And there wasn't that sense of community. So I loved Oak Park. My wife Susan always says if we hadn't moved then, we'd probably still live there now. And so it's great. This is a great homecoming.
Did Oak Park in any way affect your career? Career choices, the insights, decisions that you made along the way?
That's hard. That's hard to say. Oak Park. I will say this about Oak Park: it was a very socially aware community. It is today. People cared deeply about what was going on in the world, and both in the community and beyond. And so, if you were someone who was, deeply involved first in journalism, when I came to Oak Park, I was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune. And then I left in 1984 to work for Paul Simon. Some of you may, I hope, remember Paul. A truly great person. The words great American are thrown around too much. Paul Simon was a great American. So I left to work for him. But, there was just a great awareness in the community of issues, social issues, political issues. And so in that sense, it was a stimulating place for me to be.
The ideals of diversity that have been a hallmark of Oak Park for decades are, depending on how you look at it, under assault more than ever. Not necessarily in Oak Park, but around the country. The ideas of integration and equality. From what now has been your perspective, your mile-high, 10-mile-high, 10,000-mile-high view of America, what kind of future do you see for progressive communities that are committed to these kinds of social justice issues that seem to be on the back burner for a lot of Americans?
Well, I think, first of all, I should have mentioned that when I was discussing what I liked about Oak Park so much, what I loved about Oak Park and the diversity was part of it. I grew up in New York City. I was educated in the New York City public schools. I was accustomed to diversity. And Oak Park was a wonderfully diverse, and is a wonderfully diverse community. And it really, when I moved to this unnamed suburb, there was only,
its initials are BR, aren't they? I think so.
I lived to the, and it's not Baskin Robbins. I lived next to one of the few African American families in the entire village. And this is apropos to nothing, but it's just a good story. We showed up the first day, and we knew hadn't met them yet, but we knew that we were, because we were told, you're going to be living next to them. It's fine, good. So we see this gentleman and his son sort of chipping golf balls, which is what they did in this suburb in the backyard, which was enormous. And I went up and introduced myself. We went up and said, "We're the Axelrods. We're your new neighbors." And the father said, "No, we're just visiting. I'm Earl Woods, and this is my son Tiger." And he's here for an amateur golf tournament. He's in high school. And he came back several summers after that. But getting back to your question.
Really, that you can't top that.
No. But one of the things that's happening in our country is that we are sorting ourselves, and we're sorting ourselves, progressives and Democrats in urban areas, and the rural areas are becoming, more red, and the urban areas are becoming more blue. The urban areas are becoming more diverse. And so, yes, I think there's a future for diverse communities, but they are, they are going to be sort of these big islands surrounded by communities that are less diverse. And it's concerning to me. I think, we can talk about gerrymandering. Gerrymandering is clearly a problem, but it's also true that we are by choice aggregating ourselves in certain ways. And one of the things that I run this Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago now, and one of the things that I'm trying to do this fall, I'm going to do it, we'll see how well it works, is I'm going to take a group of students down to Central Illinois to Eureka College, where Ronald Reagan attended. I spoke at their commencements a few years ago. And the school draws a lot from the people around Central Illinois, kids around Central Illinois. And the community around it was very much supportive of Donald Trump. And it struck me the day after the election. I feel, Charlie asked me, do you want to give long answers or short answers? And I don't really know the short answer thing. But
it's all right.
The day, when Donald Trump won the election in 2000, on November 8th, I was surprised, and then I was angry because I shouldn't have been surprised for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons I shouldn't have been surprised is I have a home in southwest Michigan, off the lake in a rural area. Almost all of my neighbors had Trump signs in their yards. These people are good neighbors, and by and large, good people, really good people, and hardworking, and cared about deeply about their families. But they'd been buffeted by a lot of forces, the exportation of factories and all the things you know about. And they did feel kind of abandoned and disrespected. But then I come home and to where nobody voted for Donald Trump, and I hear people talking about the folks who did as generalizing them to be sort of toothless, ignorant racists. And it struck me that we have to break down these silos. And so I'm going to send a delegation of kids down to Central Illinois to meet with people in the community. I want them to focus on three things: jobs, education, and drugs. And then they're going to send a group up to Chicago, and we're going to do the same thing. I think this siloing of our country is really, really dangerous. And we have to stop thinking about all the things that divide us and start remembering about things that actually unite us as Americans and concerns that unite us. So I don't even remember what your question was. But
Immaterial.
I wanted
to
get that off my chest.
And you did a good job of it. Before we move on to the White House years, just for equal time, you want to say anything about River Forest?
When I first moved to Oak Park, I always thought of River Forest as the place that you moved, like, from Oak Park if you were going to move, right? Like when you got older, maybe a little bit more.
You just overshot it a little bit.
Yeah. But the Oak Park River Forest to me was one community, I'm sorry that my kids didn't get to go through the public schools to the end here. And one of the things that I missed in the schools that they did attend was that diversity. I would say this behind your back. This is a great community, and you're lucky to live here.
He did say it behind your back.
Yeah.
We're going to vault right past the Chicago years. We'll come back to that. But
should we mention one thing, about good local journalism too, right?
Yeah, nice. Wednesday Journal.
The Wednesday Journal. I mean, when I was asked to come, part of the attraction was the Wednesday Journal, which I always thought was a splendid little newspaper when I was here, and really provocative and covering local issues in a thoughtful way. So that's another blessing that you have in this community.
The White House years. What was the toughest part for you, if any part was tough? Adjusting to being not just in power, but being the power, or at least part of the power in the United States.
Well, let me just say parenthetically before I get to what was tough and what was that part of the realization you make when you come to the White House is that you're not as powerful as you thought you might be, because there are a lot of competing power sources. And one of the great challenges, and President Trump is learning this, I hope, is that you can come. I don't think he came with a particularly well-honed plan, but you can come with a really well-honed plan and say, here's what we're going to do. And then every single day something happens that takes you in a completely different direction because the job demands it. So no one knew that Hurricane Harvey was coming or Hurricane Irma was coming, and our thoughts are with those who are in the line of that hurricane. Now, we didn't know that there was going to be for example, an oil leak in the Gulf of Mexico, which took us, just absorbed a lot of energy and time. So, as powerful as you think you are, you can't control events, and events hurtle at you in the White House. For me, for us as a group, to come to office at a time when the economy was cascading over a cliff was really challenging. We met in downtown Chicago in mid-December of 2008, and this was 6 weeks removed from the great celebration in Grant Park, and we heard this chilling presentation from the economic advisors about where the economy was and where it was going, and the country hadn't yet caught up with the full gravity of our situation. And so to hear it, one after another, Christy Romer, who was going to be head of the Council of Economic Advisors, saying, this could be the deepest recession since the Great Depression. Larry Summers saying, we're going to lose millions and millions more jobs, and there could be a second Great Depression. Geithner saying the banks were locked up, the banking system was locked up, they weren't making loans, and the system could collapse. And then the budget director, Peter Orszag, saying, and this is going to add trillions of dollars to the debt. President said, well, it's too late to ask for a recount, I guess. So we better figure out what to do. And in that room, the Recovery Act was born, and several hours of discussion about what the contours of the Recovery Act would be. So we came to office, and for the first 6 months, we're just pushing buttons madly, trying to avoid the second Great Depression. Then on top of that, 2 raging wars, 180,000 troops in harm's way, ongoing terrorist threat, so just the things, just the emergencies that we faced were anyone who wasn't frightened facing all of that was not sensible. So that was hard. For me personally, what was hard was I had fashioned and I told the president this before the election when we were talking. It was clear he was going to win. And I said, I'm not sure that I can go. And he said, why not? And I said, well, I fashioned I was a newspaper reporter where irreverence was prized and challenging authority was demanded. And then I ran my own business for 25 years. And I said, I've always fashioned my whole life so that I could tell anybody to go, and I said, you can't say that to the President of the United States. He said, no, you really can't. But he said, then he made all the arguments as to why I should come. And at the end of it, he said, by the way, I said, yeah. He said, you can tell me to go. He said, just don't do it in front of anybody else. And by the way, I never, ever got to the point where I wanted to say that, which says something about our relationship.
What's your favorite moment in your years at the White House? Most memorable, most celebratory?
Oh, without question, was the night the Affordable Care Act passed. I have to tell you, in full disclosure, especially because I saw there was a stack of my books out there, so if I didn't mention it now, you'd realize it later. But I was very much I was torn because I was the president's political advisor, and the subject of the Affordable Care Act came up early in the administration, and whether we should move forward, defer it. And I was worried about it because 7 presidents had tried, 7 presidents had failed, many had suffered tremendous political reverses because of it, and we were in the middle of this recession, and I expressed myself on this, but on the other hand, I personally had lived the deficiencies of our healthcare system. When my daughter Lauren was 7 months old, she started having seizures, and this was when we were living in Hyde Park. And my wife, Susan, found her blue and limp in her crib in the morning and thought she had passed away. And then Lauren stirred and she saw this strange, she was frothing at the mouth, she was turning blue and bluer, and she rushed her to the hospital. And I got over there, I was at the newspaper, I ran down there, and we saw another one, and they said, that's a seizure. And did she have a fever? Yes. It's probably related to that. I'm sure she'll get over it in a couple of days, is what the doctor said. A month later, we were released, and she was still having 10 seizures a day. We said, what's wrong with her? They said she had an idiopathic seizure disorder. They didn't want to use the word epilepsy, but that's what it was, we learned. And we really don't know what to do. So they put her on some heavy medications, and she kept taking more over time, and different ones, and experimental ones, and surgeries, and this. But there came a point when I was at the Tribune, when I was making $38,000, $40,000 a year, and paying $1,000 a month out of pocket because the insurance wouldn't cover her medication and many of the things that she needed. So I knew how much we needed this, but my job was to give political advice. And the president, to his credit, listened, and he said, well, I hear you. He said, but what are we supposed to do, put our approval rating on the shelf and admire it for the next 8 years? Or are we supposed to draw down on it and try and do things that'll have a lasting impact on people's lives and the future of the country? And that's why I enjoyed and so appreciated working for him, because I always say I like him so much because he listened to me so little. But and as time went on during the fight for the Affordable Care Act, as predicted, we started losing support. We started taking on water. I went into his office in the summer of 2009 and with some polling data, not to persuade him that we shouldn't go forward, but just to let him know where we were. And he had just gotten back from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'll never forget this. We were standing in the middle of the Oval Office, and I'm going through this data, and he's listening respectfully. And then I finished. He said, yeah, but I just got back from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I met a woman who was 36 years old. She had 2 kids. She was married, and she and her husband both had jobs, and they had insurance, but she has stage 4 breast cancer, and now she's hit against her lifetime caps. And she's terrified that she's going to die and leave her family bankrupt. And by now I felt his hand in the small of my back kind of pushing me out of his office. We stopped at the door, and he said, that's not the country we believe in, so let's just keep fighting. And a few weeks later, we had a group meeting, and it was August by now, and things were looking grim, and someone said maybe we should, go for something smaller or throw in the towel. And he turned to his legislative director, Phil Shalero, and he said, Phil, what are the chances of passing this bill? And Phil said, well, it depends how lucky you feel, Mr. President, which is not what you want to hear, if you're the... And Obama just smiled at him and said, Phil, I'm a black guy named Barack Hussein Obama, and I'm President of the United States. He said, I feel lucky every day. And so that's the way it was. And every time we hit what looked to be like an insuperable barrier, it was the president who picked us up and said, no, we're going to keep going. We're going to keep going. And so here we were in the end of March of 2010, all standing in the Roosevelt Room, which is this sort of ceremonial conference room across from the Oval Office. Everyone who worked on the issue, the president, the vice president, all the senior staff, and junior staff that worked on it. And as the final votes ticked down and it was clear that the Affordable Care Act was going to pass, I got up and I left the group and I went across the hall to my office and I closed the door and I sobbed. And it was nothing I expected, and I didn't even understand it at first. And then I realized that because of what he had done and because of what we had been able to do to help him, there were families that weren't going to have to go through what my family went through. And I went and I found him and I said that to him. And he put his hand on my shoulder. He said, that's why we do the work. And I will never, ever forget that for the rest of my life. To me, that is an encapsulation of why public service matters, why you should do this work, because you have the chance to really touch people's lives in a way that's so meaningful and give them a better chance. And so... And you know, the thing that I found so exasperating about this, the whole repeal and replace exercise was it seemed devoid of understanding or feeling about any of that. It was all a political exercise. Well, we promised, so now we have to do it. And you know, one of the things people ask me all the time, well, are you sad that they're trying to dismantle Obama's legacy? So I have to be really honest with you. I don't give a rat's ass about that. I really don't. I don't care. I love Barack Obama. I'm proud of him. I think history is going to be very good to him. But the issue isn't about his legacy. The issue is about the lives of all these people who need this health care.
Is there anything that you wish you and the administration had done better or differently?
Oh,
let me ask just one. There are probably a few. Aren't there for all of us?
Oh, for sure. I mean, look, one of the things that I think that we did intermittently well but not consistently well was speak to the fundamental economic challenges that go beyond simply righting the economy after the recession. There are things going on in our economy that go back much further than September of 2008 when the collapse happened, that goes to these revolutionary changes we felt because of globalization, because of technology. It's created an enormous opportunity for some people, and it's dislocated many others, and it's created an enormous amount of anxiety for people. I don't think that we consistently communicated our focus on that, our concern on it. I think that was, maybe even more true in the second term than the first. And I think that was a mistake. Because I think that actually it probably opened the door to the election of 2016, the election of Donald Trump, and I think moving forward, Democrats need to be focused. Focused like a laser is a cliche, but focused in a very disciplined way, and in a very honest way about this challenge that we have, because the forces of change are churning faster and faster all the time. That's the nature of technology. So in a very few years, we're going to have these what driverless cars, or what the industry likes to call autonomous cars, because somebody did market research and realized that driverless cars doesn't sound very good. And there are 3 to 5 million people who make a living driving cars in this country. So where are they going in the economy? And there are so many other functions that are being replaced now by robots and computers. We're not going to turn those forces back. But the question is, how do we manage that transition? How do we prepare people for the jobs that will emerge? What kind of support do people need so that work actually pays in this country? Because that's a fundamental American value, right? If you work hard, you can get ahead. People are beginning to doubt that, maybe not even beginning. And so these are really big fundamental questions that need to be addressed day in and day out. And I wish we did it effectively from about about September of 2011 to November of 2012, because we had the discipline of a campaign that forced us to, campaigns force that kind of discipline. But as I said, when you're president, there's so many things to do and so many challenges and I think in the second term, he felt such urgency to get things done on climate change and social and criminal justice reform and a variety of other issues that there's only so much bandwidth to communicate. So even if you're working hard on these economic issues, if you're not communicating them on a regular basis, people begin to doubt,
How often are you in touch with President Obama? Can you tell me without having to kill me?
I can't, so I'm sorry, Pam, wherever you are. I'm going to tell him. I know you've had a great relationship these last 40 years or whatever it is. But no, I talk to him, I would say, every few weeks or so. Talk or email. We often email. And I see him sometimes. I've seen him mostly when he's been through town here. But we talk on an as-needed basis.
More about what is needed to come. But right now I'm going to move into part 3 of our interview.
My God, we're into part 3 already.
Part 3, I know. Because part 4 is really the blockbuster, because those are the questions
He says that your questions were fantastic.
They were, and we'll get to them. But part 3 is what now? Which, again, I think is something people are interested in.
I thought part 3 is what now?
Part 3 is what now, and then part 4 is their questions.
Oh, no.
We should have had this up on the screen. I'm sorry. I don't know what we were thinking.
No, I thought you were saying what now, and I was saying part 3.
Oh, part 3, yes. My role here is really irrelevant. I have to say that. Pick one. President Trump or President Pence? I worked hard on that one.
Yeah. I really, it's tough for the obvious reason. But, my big concern, I think you're going to probably get really bad policy either way, from my perspective. I think that's a given. But what really, really worries me is that I think our institution, there is tremendous torque on our institutions generally. I mean, you look around the world, and I think a lot of it has to do with these big economic changes. But I saw Edelman does this survey of public confidence in institutions, and they do it, I think, on an annual basis. There's been this plummeting of confidence in government, in business, and in almost all institutions. What really bothers me about President Trump is his fundamental disregard for and fundamental lack of understanding, I think, of the role of democratic institutions. He disdains them and would discard them if he could. I don't think it's an accident that the people he seems to admire are the, Erdogans of the world, who he called alone among all the Western leaders to congratulate him on an initiative to cut back on democratic institutions in Turkey. He has taken a hammer blow to the media, taken a hammer blow to the judiciary, taken a hammer blow even to the Congress, and to his predecessor. And when you are the President of the United States, you are the trustee of our democracy. And if the trustee of our democracy is every single day trying to undermine faith in it, I think that has very profound long-term implications.
Trump? Or Pence?
So let me talk about that.
Please do.
The other thing, by the way, is globally, it seems to me ludicrous to be getting into a taunting war on Twitter with a crazy man in North Korea who has nuclear weapons. So, there's that as well. So I don't think Mike Pence will get into a Twitter war with a crazy man in North Korea with nuclear weapons, or do some of the other things that Donald Trump has done that fundamentally undermine faith in democracy and faith. Now, do I like Pence's positions on any number of issues? No.
But it sounds like I mean,
you know, well, but I'm hoping that this is not a binary choice and there'll be other options.
Let's look ahead to 2018. I don't know if you care to make a prediction or care to describe what you foresee just in more
Look, on the
general
one
terms.
hand, I think that there's an enormous amount of energy out there. So I was talking to someone today who said in the 40 special elections since November 8th, Democratic turnout has been up over what would be expected by about 6%, which is quite a bit when you think about it. Enough to tilt a close election, and Democrats have won elections, you know, that they had a chance to win. I think there was an unrealistic expectations about some of the congressional specials, which after all were all in districts that were heavily Republican districts. And there's an enormous amount of energy. It's also showing up in the number of candidates who are stepping forward. I mean, people who said, I just can't sit here, I need to do something. It showed itself in the wonderful outpouring at these town hall meetings of people around the issue of health care, which I think had a lot to do with the defeat of the repeal and replace effort. So, you know, and these, by the way, are hopeful signs for our democracy. I mean, that's how ultimately democracies only work if the governed are engaged. And so there's a high level of engagement. But there are structural barriers to Democrats making huge gains in 2018. In fact, if I were to guess, I would guess that you could leave 2018 with a more Republican Senate, not a less Republican Senate, because you have 10 Democratic senators who are running for re-election in districts that Donald Trump, in states, I should say, that Donald Trump won, and in many of them by significant margins, states like Indiana, states like Missouri. Look, even in Ohio, where Sherrod Brown is running for re-election, you know, Trump won by a significant margin. So it would be an incredible upset if Democrats even held serve. There's only one state, there are potentially two states where Republicans could be at risk. Nevada, where Dean Heller is running, and Senator Flake in Arizona, partly because Flake now apparently will have a Trump-sponsored opponent in the primary. So he could be beaten, and you could get kind of a right-wing candidate who could be vulnerable to a Democrat. So that's the Senate. The House, because there is not a lot of elasticity in the House. There aren't that many swing districts anymore because of redistricting and gerrymandering, because of the sorting I spoke about. And there are probably, Democrats need 24 seats to take the House, and there are only 4 or 5 pure swing districts. So there'd have to be an enormous wave that isn't yet evident for Democrats to take the House. So I think Democrats will narrow the margin in the House. As I sit here today, and this could change, I'd be surprised if Democrats took the House.
2020?
Well, I like the chances of the Democratic Party better in 2020. You know, first of all, I don't know who the Republican candidate's going to be. I mean, I honestly don't, and I don't say that to be snarky. First of all, I look at Donald Trump, and even if he navigates his way through these 4 years, and people always say to me, well, how long do you think he'll last? As if we're like a parliamentary system. I mean, there is a constitution. He does have a 4-year term. I'm assuming he will serve for 4 years, unless the Congress or the good Lord intervene. I'm not expecting either of those things. So, but he sure doesn't look to me like a guy who loves his job. And I could easily see him looking for a way out. And his relationship with the party itself is so tentative. So I don't know who it could be. It could be Pence. It could be someone else. That said, they will bear the burden of Donald Trump in that election. And I think Democrats, unless they screw it up, should do well in that election, and it could be that Democrats are up to the job.
Do you have a favorite among the many, many Democratic names that are floating around for the presidency in 2020?
I always say it's easier to put a list together of the people who aren't running for president than a list of the people who are, because that's so lengthy.
Well, I'd take an answer from that group, too.
Look, I have my feeling, and it's more pronounced. One of the reasons I thought Barack Obama could win in 2008 was because I thought the election would be defined by George Bush, even though he was the outgoing president, and that people were going to be looking for the remedy, not the replica, to Bush. Bush was seen as bombastic, highly partisanized, hardly highly partisan, I should say, and didn't see the nuance and the gray in the world, all of that stuff. And people wanted a more thoughtful, nuanced thinker who would represent more of a unifying figure. And Obama was clearly set up to be that person. And in that sense, that's the other reason why I should have anticipated Trump, because Trump, there's nobody who is more the antithesis of Barack Obama than Donald Trump. So now I do think I think that the general electorate in 2020 is going to be looking for someone who is a more healing figure, someone who will invoke those things that unite us as Americans instead of mining those things that divide us as Americans, someone who offers authentic and big answers to the problems that we face, and someone who does get the world in the way an American leader should.
Who are some people who have those qualities?
Many, many people, Charlie.
Care to toss out a few names?
I'm not, I think it's early to sort of endorse candidates. I'm not in the candidate endorsement business anymore.
Stipulated.
But I'll give you a prototype of the kind of candidate who could fit that description. And I know him well because he was an old client of mine. And that's Governor Deval Patrick of Massachusetts, the former governor of Massachusetts, who is, by the way, from Chicago, grew up in the shadow of Cabrini Green, and has a wonderful personal story, but had a great record in Massachusetts, and is, and is a very, very inspiring and thoughtful guy. I find one person very intriguing. Mayor Mitch Landrieu of New Orleans. I don't know if any of you saw the speech he made around the monuments in New Orleans, but it was a great speech. And people say, well, how can you go from being a mayor to president of the United States? But we just elected a reality show star. So anything's possible. And then there are many others. Look, I sat yesterday with Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, and I know he's very interested in, raising the issue of climate change in a huge way. He wouldn't say whether he's going to run or not. I suspect he's thinking about it. Governor Hickenlooper of Colorado, half the United States Senate, and
almost half.
Mayor Garcetti of L.A., I know, is looking at it. Jason Kander, who nearly got elected senator from Missouri, has been seen in New Hampshire and I think Iowa. And it could be that he was just seeing the sights, but I think that there can be a lot of applicants. The thing I hope that, and let's not forget, Joe Biden's still talking about it. Bernie's still talking about it. Elizabeth Warren certainly is looking at it. All of those candidates. The thing that I hope we do not do, however, is get into a kind of internecine war that makes it harder to succeed in the fall. I think the Democratic Party has to stand for something, and the Democratic Party has to stand for progressive principles and really big and pragmatic ideas, actionable ideas, and I think we should all agree on that. What I hope we don't get into is a kind of purity test where where Democrats are sniping at Democrats to the point where the party is less. When I said that Democrats could, it's essentially their race to lose in 2020 as we sit here today, and they may be up to the job. That's what I meant.
Quick answer to this one.
Impossible.
No, you could do it. If President Trump or a President Pence were to call you and say, I really need your help, would you?
Well, it depends on what
I need your guidance.
Was.
I need you to come on board and be a political mentor to me.
No, look, I don't think it's a frivolous question, because if you believe in our system, then you should want to make things work. And if you think you have a chance to make things work, then you need to really consider those things. In my case, I'm not sure. In this case, I'm not sure that the fit would be so off that I'm not sure that you could. And I think there is a hubris sometimes associated with people in my position. Old political hacks and so on who played at that level to think, well, I can fix that. Sometimes you can't.
You don't think that he would let you say?
I don't know if he'd let me, but I bet you I'd get there pretty quick.
On to questions from this engaged audience. As the son of an immigrant, you've been tweeting up quite a bit lately about the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals policy. Predictions?
I'd like to be hopeful because so many Republicans have said that they feel that something should be done, including the Speaker. But already in the second day, now you see caveats being put on it. It's really worrisome. And, the president says, well, if they don't act in 6 months, I'll revisit this. He sent his attorney general out to say that this executive order was unconstitutional. And so I don't know how you revisit that. Say, I think I'm going to go back and do that unconstitutional thing. He may not think that's bad. I don't know. But I am worried that this will, because of the internal dynamics within the Republican Party and the strong anti-immigration fervor. And by the way, it's so interesting that almost all of it emanates from places where there are hardly any immigrants. So, I'm worried that whether it's the wall or some other thing, that tests will be set up that will make it very difficult to pass a remedy. If they could, this will have been for the best, because when President Obama signed DACA, he said, this is not a substitute for legislative action. And I was in the White House when we tried to pass the DREAM Act, and it failed by 5 votes. We got 55 votes in the Senate. So it would be great if it was enshrined in law. But the vehemence of the Republican base, and you asked me about 2018, the longer we go, the more you're going to hear this drumbeat from the Republican right that if you pass a bill like that and the president signs it, that you're going to kill turnout in 2018 and Republicans are going to lose. And so, I'm very, very worried about it, and I'm heartsick for these kids who, you see one after the other of them. You meet them. I've met them on television. Some may attend this university. Splendid kids who deserve so much better. And I think about what this country made possible for my father who came here when he was 12 years old. And I want that for those kids.
What's the best thing President Trump has done? What's the best thing President Trump has done since taking office? The person who asked this acknowledged that this is a challenging question.
It is. Well, I mean, it's an order of magnitude. So, like, it could be the least worst thing. Until yesterday, I would have said, well, he didn't end DACA. But all the things that I'm going to say could change momentarily. So far, he hasn't ended the Iran agreement, but there's talk that he might. I'm going to have to come back to you on that.
We'll be here every month, I think. Problem common to a lot of people who live around here, one person writes. I contact my congressman often, but I am preaching to the choir in my Democratic representatives, Durbin, Duckworth, Davis. What else can I do? What's the best way to channel my energy and resources when I'm represented by someone who already agrees with me?
Well, don't sell yourself short. Maybe you persuaded them. I don't think so. No, look, I think this is this is the problem with the sorting and that we've talked about is that, when you have more competitive districts, then you get a better hearing from your members of Congress. And when the primaries aren't the only contest that they're concerned about. Because at the end of the day, one thing you learn in Washington is, and I've met many good people there, and there are people who I think genuinely try and do positive things, but there is this overwhelming sense that the first mission is to get reelected. And I don't think that's new. I always say there's a reason Profiles in Courage was such a slim volume, right? People, and most members rationalize it by saying, look, if I'm not here, I can't do any good. So I've got to get back here, and that means I have to. But if they're never hearing from anybody, if they don't feel threatened in any way, or there's not a competitive situation in their district. That said, I think there are ways to make your voices heard beyond. Maybe you should go into other districts, nearby districts, show up at town hall meetings, make your feelings heard. But there's no doubt this is a problem. Also, by the way, one other thing I would say: in the age of social media, even if you don't live in competitive districts, you may have friends, relatives, acquaintances who do, colleagues, and you should get in touch with them and urge them to take action. The most effective way to mobilize people today is through Facebook, friend to friend. Now I know there are the young here and many of the young at heart who may not be on Facebook, I don't know. But those of you who are, and even those who can just pick up the phone, get people who are in places that are meaningful politically to call their reps and try and woo them, particularly in these swing Republican districts in suburban areas around the country.
I want to make clear, I'm reading these questions that have been submitted. Is Hillary Clinton going to try again in 2020, and how can we make sure that doesn't happen?
I would be really surprised if that happened. I really would. I think this was a tough experience for her, and I think she would. Well, I think she has a lot of. She still has a committed core of support, and there are people who rightly believe that there were things that happened in that campaign that were grossly unfair. I think there's also a recognition that there were things that should have happened that didn't happen that were very much the responsibility of the campaign and the candidate. And so I think people are going to be looking for other alternatives in 2020, and I'm sure that as she travels around, that she will get get that message.
Was
that diplomatic enough?
Yes. Does the Democratic Party need a new strategy to win, or just a strategy to wait for the Republicans to lose?
No, I think that that's always a bad strategy, to wait for the other side to lose. I think that the Democratic Party owes the country more than the low bar of being better than Donald Trump. I think the Democratic, as I point out, I feel a sense of desperation about the changes that we're going through, changes in our economy, changes in the way we communicate. We live in revolutionary times, and I fear that these changes are coming so fast that only with really conscious effort can we get our arms around it and deal with some of the problems that this is creating for people. And if we don't worry about that truck driver whose job is going to be made obsolete, if we don't worry about people, frankly, who are doing white-collar jobs that are going to be done by artificial intelligence or and computers, if we don't worry about these changes, if we don't insist on trade agreements that are good for American workers, although I believe in trade agreements, then the frustration people feel is going to grow, and that's going to translate into less and less faith in democracy. You see these polls, and the number of people who say they don't have faith in democracy growing, number of people who sort of embrace autocracy growing. So this isn't just about the Democratic Party. I think the Democratic Party owes, because we believe in government and we believe in democracy, owes something more than just to say we're better than Donald Trump.
I told you I'd put off the lightning round as long as possible.
Yeah.
We got about 5 minutes left, so I want to blast through these. I'm told you're on a really tight schedule, so we have to get you out of here. And sign those books, which everyone I hope has bought. So here we go. Is it time for some of the longtime Democratic leadership like Nancy Pelosi to step aside?
I love Nancy Pelosi. She is the most underrated person in Washington. She is the best legislative leader that I've seen in my lifetime, certainly on the national, let's say this. She's the best person I ever worked with.
So that's a no.
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is you do have a House leadership, all of whom I think are over 75. And there's something, it's not just about optics, it's also about the perspective that younger people bring. So I think there needs to be more youth in the leadership, whether it's Pelosi or others, Hoyer or
So that's a yes.
Clyburn.
This is the lightning round, so that's a yes.
So how come if it's the lightning round, you're not moving on to the next question?
I want to get an answer to this one. Why do you think Trump sided with the Democrats today on extending the debt limit for 3 months over the objections of his own colleagues, allegedly in the Democratic Party?
It kind of beats the hell out of me.
Okay, next question.
No, but let me just say this. I've been thinking about this all day since it happened. I think one is that he wanted to show McConnell and Ryan that if they didn't produce what he wanted, that he was willing to work with Democrats. The second is, I think he's so desperate for a deal. You know, it's hard to be the master of the art of the deal and never make any. So,
from a cynic, one of your earliest political clients was the extremely progressive Mayor Harold Washington.
yes.
Could you look him in the eye today?
I don't even understand why that question comes
I
up.
hesitate to interpret, but the idea is that Harold Washington was much farther to the left than some of the Democrats you've been working with more recently.
No, I don't know about that. You know, Harold, I loved Harold Washington. He was one of the most authentic, inspiring guys I've ever known. And yes, Harold was very progressive. Harold was also very pragmatic. And, Harold understood the nuts and bolts of politics and getting things done and was not averse to making a deal when he had to. And he understood where the lines should be drawn. My only regret is that Harold didn't live long enough to know Barack Obama. I think Barack Obama stood on Harold Washington's shoulders when he got elected to the Senate here in Illinois. And it happened that happened on the night. Some of you may remember in 1983 when Harold Washington campaigned. I was a reporter then before I worked for him at a church on the northwest side, St. Paschal's Church, and was greeted with a crowd that was really as vicious as anything you would have seen in the 60s in the South. And he was campaigning with Walter Mondale. It became national news. And on the night that Barack Obama won the Senate primary, he carried almost the entire northwest side in a 7-candidate field, and including that precinct. And I said to him that Harold was smiling down on him that night. But I think they would have been great friends, and Harold would have been a great mentor for him. So I'm sorry they never met.
So I think that's a yes. You could look him in the eye.
Oh, totally, yeah. And I think he'd look back.
Do you tweet your own words?
Oh, yeah. Yes. I have the carpal tunnel to prove it, too. I have to say, I'm a little embarrassed about it. I mean, first of all, the president has given tweeting a bad name. If you ask me one bit of advice that I would give him, I would say, put the phone down, back away from the table, do not tweet. I think that would be a positive step forward. But, it is a way to inject your thoughts into the debate. And and I tweet my own words, yes. That with the occasional misspelling.
Your return to the your entry to the podcast business, reflective of your early work for WXRT, hosting Talking Headlines, has prompted one of our listeners, or audience members here, to ask, do you listen to any other podcasts?
You know, I listen to my boys on Pod Save America from time to time. I should listen to more. But between doing the podcast twice a week, doing a TV version of the podcast on CNN once a month, doing the other stuff I do on CNN and running my Institute of Politics, I just don't find the time to do it.
From a worry perspective, how would you rate this political era versus others that you have experienced?
Well, it's probably more worrisome than others I've experienced, although we've gone through some really bad times. I mean, I'm old, right? So, I was a child in the McCarthy era. I have vague recollections of that, and certainly of hearing about it from my parents. We're about to mark the 50th anniversary of 1968 when Martin Luther King was assassinated, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. We had the calamitous convention downtown, Democratic convention, and Richard Nixon was elected president of the United States, which ultimately led to Watergate. And I think that cycle of cynicism that we still deal with today. So, there have been bad periods in our history before. You go back to the 19th century and even more so. Look at where we were in the 1930s in this country and all the tumult in the midst of the Depression and so on. So, the thing that my concern though is just lack of faith, people's diminished faith in our institutions and our democracy to respond to the challenges that we have. And so again, I think it's the responsibility of people who do believe to fight hard to come up with constructive ideas and to deal with these problems.
As a Bulls fan,
I can't be optimistic about.
Dennis Rodman.
Yes.
Does Dennis Rodman have a constructive role to play in U.S.-North Korea relations? This is a lightning round question.
I think that he can bring rational, sober explanation to the president's thoughts.
We got through about half the questions I have, but
Well, give me 2 more.
You're the boss. Let's see, I have to back up now. Hold on.
Now I stumped you.
I know you did. Will we be able to restore honor to the presidency, or has a line been crossed? Has the presidency, the institution of the presidency, been irrevocably damaged?
Listen, I worked for one of the most honorable presidents in the history of this country, I believe. You know, when I got to Washington, they said to me, you've got to get legal insurance. I said, what's legal insurance? Well, they said, for sure you're going to get subpoenaed. You know, you're going to have all kinds of problems. Everybody who comes to the White House does in this era. Not only did I not have those problems, but virtually none of my colleagues. And the reason was that there was a strong sense of ethics that came right from the top, a sense that we were privileged to be there. And so I've seen honor in the White House, and I believe we'll see honor in the White House again.
How concerned are you about the prospect of Russian hacking and fake news in the next round of elections and beyond?
I am concerned. I mean, I think you have to be concerned because they're not just doing it here, they're doing it everywhere. They're trying to weaken Western democracies, and they've had, some success at that. And the thing that worries me, I had this discussion with Adam Schiff. He did my podcast. He came to our institute, splendid guy. And he said his concern was that the next time, all they had to do was slip 5 false documents into the WikiLeaks dump amid all the authentic ones, and it would have been very difficult, in the moment at least, to discern what was truth and what was not, and that could have roiled the election further. And I expect that you will see that, attempts to do that. And so, this exercise that this Congress is involved in is more than just whether Donald Trump or his campaign did something wrong. It really should be about how we undergird ourselves against this kind of thing in the future. And I hope that whatever else comes out of this, that there are real steps taken to try and protect the sanctity of our elections.
One more. Back when we were neighbors, did you ever have any problem with the way I maintain the lawn?
No, but I will say this. When we were driving out here, I was looking at Charlie, and I was reminded of the fact that when my kids were growing up, I don't know about your kids, they loved listening to this guy Raffi. And it always struck me when we lived on the 100 block of North Harvey that he was his doppelganger. And so we looked up a picture of Raffi today. He's an environmental and social activist in Canada.
Friends with David on Twitter.
A friend of mine on Twitter. And he looks just as much like him today. So
David, I want to thank you.
That seemed like the most relevant point to end on. Let me thank you, because, and all of you. I know, and not just for being here, that's the least of it, but I know without knowing that there are all kinds of people in this audience who helped Barack Obama and who are involved in all kinds of things, both local and beyond, to try and make this community stronger, make the country better. It's one of the great things, as I said at the beginning, about being in this community. So you honor me by being here, but I really honor you for everything that you guys have done. So thank you.
And that's the way it sounded. David Axelrod at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois, the inaugural event in the Wednesday Journal Conversations series. I'm Charlie Meyerson. Thanks for listening.